Midnight, Pacific Ocean, 1945, and a torpedo just tore the USS Indianapolis in half. 12 minutes. That's all it took for a ship the size of a city block to disappear. 900 men hit the water that night, and the sharks hadn't even arrived yet. Here's the part that should terrify you. The Navy had no idea the ship was even missing. Days earlier, this same ship had carried a secret that could end the war. Nobody aboard knew what was in that crate, not even the captain fully. Inside it, pieces of the first atomic bomb ever built. So what happens when the ship carrying that secret sails home completely alone? Late July 1945. The mission's done. The crate is gone. The USS Indianapolis just delivered pieces of the Hiroshima bomb to a tiny island called Tinian. Fastest delivery of its kind in the whole war. The crew got a pat on the back and new orders. Head to the Philippines. Alone. No destroyer escort. That decision, made in some office, on some form, would cost hundreds of lives. Nobody told the ship that Japanese submarines were operating in those exact waters. The crew didn't know. The captain didn't know. Command just forgot to mention it. Bureaucracy moved slow that week. The submarine did not. Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto had been hunting for days and finding nothing. Then, just after 11 at night, he saw a shape against the moonlight. A warship. Alone. Not zigzagging, not even trying to hide. He couldn't believe his luck. 6 torpedoes fired. 2 found their target. 12:14 a.m., July 30th. The first explosion tore open the bow. The second hit the fuel tanks and turned the front of the ship into a furnace. Sailors below deck woke up to fire pouring down the corridors. Power died within seconds. No lights. No radio room that worked right. The ship began listing hard to starboard almost immediately. Men who'd been asleep in their bunks had maybe 90 seconds to get topside. Some didn't make it out of the lower decks at all. Roughly 300 men went down with the ship in those first few minutes. And still, nobody on land knew any of this was happening, because here's the twist almost nobody knows. The Indianapolis never sent a distress signal that anyone received. 3 SOS calls went out. Records later showed all 3 were ignored, or missed, or disbelieved. One officer reportedly thought it was a Japanese trick and went back to bed. So no help was coming. Not that night. Not the next day either. 12 minutes after the first torpedo, the ship was completely gone. 900 men were left treading water in the dark, scattered across miles of open Pacific. Most had life jackets. Very few had a lifeboat. Fuel oil coated the surface of the water, thick and black. It burned their eyes and coated their throats every time a wave broke over them. Some had shrapnel wounds. Some had burns. Nobody had fresh water. The captain survived the sinking, but barely, and without knowing how many of his men made it off. He'd commanded a ship of nearly 1,200 souls. Now he was just one more head in the water. Groups began finding each other in the dark, calling out names. Some groups had 50 men. Some had 3. Some men were entirely alone. And the ocean here isn't shallow, calm, or close to land. This is deep Pacific water, hundreds of miles from the nearest island. And not one search plane had been sent to look for them. Because as far as the Navy's records showed, the Indianapolis was exactly where it was supposed to be. On schedule, safe, present and accounted for. Nobody had noticed it never arrived. That's not a rumor. That's a fact confirmed in the official Navy inquiry after the war. A ship carrying 1,200 men had vanished, and no one thought to check. Meanwhile, in the water, the sun was starting to come up. For a moment, some of the men actually felt relief. Daylight meant they could see each other. Daylight also meant something else was waking up. Far below the surface, shapes had already started circling. Drawn in, most likely, by the blood and the noise of a sinking ship. Nobody in the water knew it yet, but they weren't alone anymore. And somewhere below them, a fin broke the surface for the very first time. 900 men, 4 days, shark-infested waters, and the Navy still doesn't know they're out here. That fin didn't belong to just one shark. There were dozens, maybe more. Oceanic whitetips mostly, a species built for exactly this kind of opportunity. They don't usually hunt near the surface, but 300 sinking men had just changed that. For now, they were only circling, testing, waiting. And that waiting was almost worse than an attack. Word spread fast between the groups. Keep your legs still, don't splash. Easier said than done when you're exhausted, injured, and terrified. The captain's group drifted separately, unaware how many other clusters even existed. No one in his group had a working radio, a flare, or a map. All they had was each other and the hope someone, somewhere, would notice. But back on land, the paperwork said everything was fine. The Indianapolis wasn't flagged missing. It wasn't flagged anything. A system built to track 1,200 men had simply lost them. The sun climbed higher, and with it came a question nobody wanted to say out loud. How long could 900 men tread water before the ocean itself became the enemy? Nobody had an answer. Nobody on that water had ever needed one before. The captain's group had drifted close enough now to hear another cluster calling out names. For a moment, hearing other voices felt like rescue. It wasn't. It was just more of them. 2 small groups became one slightly bigger group, and that was the best news all morning. Somewhere in that merged group, men started doing the math nobody wanted to do. 900 had gone into the water. Nobody in it could see more than a fraction of that number. And on land, that fraction was rounding down to 0. The paperwork still said the ship never even left port late. A voyage that ended in the ocean hadn't even been logged as delayed yet. The most powerful navy on Earth didn't know it had just lost 1,200 men. Back in the water, the fin from that morning hadn't gone anywhere. It had simply been joined by a second. Then, not long after, a third. Nobody in the water needed a marine biologist to know that wasn't a good sign. So the men did the only thing left to them. They went still, and they waited. Waiting, it turned out, would become the only skill that actually mattered out here. And 900 men were about to find out exactly how long they could hold on to it. And here's the detail that still shocks historians. Nobody would even start looking for 4 more days. 4 days, in water, with sharks, and a navy that had simply lost track of 1,200 men. The men floating out there had no way of knowing any of this. As far as they knew, someone was already on the way. They had no idea they'd become the biggest single loss of life at sea in US Navy history. And they had no idea it would take a lucky accident, not a search plan, to save them. That part of the story, the part with the plane, the pilot, and the miracle, is still ahead. Right now, all that matters is this. Dawn just broke on day 1, and the Finns are already back. 900 men are still out there. 300 never made it this far. And not one ship, not one plane, is coming for them yet. If you want to know how any of them made it out alive, that's next episode. And trust me, the ending is stranger and crueler than you'd expect. If this channel's your kind of story, subscribe. A new animated history documentary drops every Saturday. Because next time, we're going back into that water. 4 days, open ocean, sharks circling closer every hour, and a rescue that almost didn't happen at all. Some of these men would spend 80-some hours in that water before anyone even saw them. Others wouldn't last that long. The sharks didn't care about rank or medals or orders from command. Out here, everyone was just prey or lucky. And luck, so far, hadn't shown up yet. The captain was still out there too, still not knowing how many of his men survived. He'd find out eventually, but not for days. 900 men went into that water the night the Indianapolis sank. Not all of them would come out. That number, 900 men in the water, is the number this whole story turns on. Remember it, because next episode we find out exactly how many of them lived to tell it. 4 days, shark-infested waters, a rescue nobody planned. That's where we pick up, next time in the water with the sharks and the 900 men still waiting.